Thanks for coming. This is a really interesting project that I've been working on for a few years, so I'm excited to sort of put it forward again. I've been working on this project with my supervisor, Haynes. We don't have the relationship that was seen in the video, so that's nice. But also Lucas and Julia, a few of our colleagues from Kin. So we see open science as a really important way to address sort of large-scale, complex phenomena. Think interorganizational collaborations, societal challenges, things like that. What open science can allow us to do with qualitative data is to analyze multiple complex cases in depth. So if we were to have access to all of this data out there on different cases, we could come up with some pretty interesting findings. Qualitative data is rich, so we have this depth, but we could also compare across cases, which would allow us to come to some more generalizable conclusions in some ways, but also accumulate on some of the theory. A lot of case studies will be developing theory in a really sort of case-bounded way. So there are currently two sort of broad approaches that we see to open science and qualitative research. On one hand, you have this distributed research, so think this collaborative way of doing research, dividing and conquering by having a large research team going out and conducting new research data collection or data collection efforts, basically. The pros of this, it allows us to collect a lot of extensive data collection between a few people. The big con here is that still is a substantial time investment. It takes a lot to get into all of these sites, to get into all of these cases and collect new data, and that's expensive. On the other hand, we have this data reuse. So I'll focus a little bit more on this data reuse for this talk. But of course, if there's data out there that we can reuse, that's more cost efficient, it's more time efficient. The big con here is there's sort of basic confidentiality concerns. With qualitative data, we can't really anonymize everything. So the current approach to qualitative data reuse would be, theoretically, de-identification. So it would end up looking something like this, where you get a bunch of qualitative data and then you have one piece. For the researcher, this is completely decontextualized. We have no idea what this means. Therefore, we just lose the meaning entirely. There's not really a solution for getting this context back. So we basically lose this entirely. And importantly, in qualitative research, it's decoupled from the experience of the original researcher. Even if I were to read the entire raw data set, I wouldn't necessarily know what it's about. In which context was it collected originally? So there's all of this data out there that's collected, all of this qualitative data. However, we sort of see it as sometimes it just ends up sitting on a shelf and collecting dust, which is a bit of a shame. So we can reuse this data in a way. There's a lot of, so on top of this, we have a lot of organizations out there who get similar requests from researchers. If we have 16 research teams going to the same organization and asking for the same thing, perhaps that gets a little bit annoying. At the same time, we're also further and further pressured by funding requirements to be more open in the way we do our science. So there's an opportunity here. There's a huge volume of existing data out there, but we have to remain sort of confidential. Qualitative data is really versatile. It's a lot of in-depth data, so there's a lot to find in it. At the same time, if we collaborate with others, what we're able to do is sort of get that contextualization back, which means between cases, we can start to compare what happens and build theory that's a little bit more transferable between cases in some ways, especially for large-scale phenomenon. So we've developed this alternative at first, starting about 2 or 3 years ago. We call it distributed reanalysis. So this combines the sort of collaborative logic of team research with the logic of reusing existing data. So we're reanalyzing data that's already been out there, basically hand in hand with the researchers who originally collected it. So we've done this in a pilot study on network governance. So think big collaborations about topics like ocean sustainability, cleaner logistics, smart cities. The sort of key theoretical challenge here that we are addressing is we need to collaborate within these networks. However, governing this network still remains a bit of a tricky puzzle. So what we've done is we've reached out to about 26 other researchers who we've involved in the paper as co-authors. And they represent about 15 cases that we looked at. So with these researchers, what we've done is we reached out and asked if they've had a case that was interesting for us to study. That mostly started within our own sort of network, so also in our department, and then we've slowly expanded outwards to represent that whole 15 case set. First, we provided them with this analytical guide, and I'll go into a little bit more depth on this later. But basically, this is a roadmap for how we want you to reanalyze your case. So we basically hand them a pre-cooked theoretical framework with which they can reanalyze their case. Another thing here is we've included case selection criteria here. So we had a set of 5 or so case selection criteria of what would make a case that could fit into this analysis. We've also included this rules of engagement document, this one on the bottom right. And this had roles and responsibilities generally, but also outlined what co-authorship meant for us. So because they're reanalyzing data and because they're contributing to the final manuscript, we include them as co-authors. So what we've done with this analytical guide is we created these sort of theoretical categories. So people can essentially say, my case fits into this box, and then give a description why. But importantly, they also provide a data excerpt. So we, importantly, do not get the entire set of raw data. We basically get data excerpts that are given to us at the discretion of the researcher who originally collected it. So we started this process by analyzing 2 of our own cases that we did have the entire raw data set for, and then, like I said, expanded outwards. But importantly here is that we do not see the entire raw data set. That is shared with us. And if needed, they also sort of decontextualize some of the material there to remain anonymous. So we hand out all of these analytical guides to all of these contributing researchers. They analyze their case according to our framework. And then what we've done is sort of collected all of these analytical guides together and essentially laid them side by side so that we can see the differences and the similarities between the cases based on a certain way that it was classified. So for example, if 2 cases were classified one way, we can see how they justified it, which tells us how they interpreted their case, and the data that it includes the data that they used to support that. And I'll just brush over this, but this is essentially the output of this process. So we were able to come to a classification of these 15 cases, and then what you see here with these sort of little gray boxes is sort of how they move. But important here is we were able to classify different cases and compare them and see clear differences and similarities for how the networks were governed and what worked and what didn't work in certain cases. So what we've learned so far is that there's a lot of enthusiasm for doing this. It's quite a big time effort, but and we need to explain a lot what we're doing. There's a lot of fears around sharing raw qualitative data, of course, for confidentiality concerns. We've run into this problem a couple of times, but we also have to be very clear on our story explaining we're not looking for the raw data itself, but we're looking for interpretations of your raw data supported by data excerpts. And that difference has become really, really important. We've also been refining the rules of engagement over time. That was sort of an initial step, but more importantly, this analytical guide that I spoke about has sort of been iteratively developed with the co-authors. I think at first we had this idea that it would be a little bit less engaged with them, but it's really this interaction and through conversation that this analytical guide has developed. We happen to be in the revision process right now for the paper, and this analysis has gotten very, very complex. So we've done that together with everybody, and that's a lot of scheduling joint meetings and making sense of things. Let's see. It's also really nice that we are finding value in old data that has been collected. That's been really nice to see. Like I said, it's become more and more complex over time to compare across cases, but also the justification. So we're dealing with a lot of interpretations here. So I have written here, we are interpreting the researchers' interpretations of the case who are interpreting their data through our analytical lens. I don't want to leave you to digest that, but it's a lot of interpretation happening here. It's also that we need to be sharp on our analytical lens, our interpretive, our analytical lens from the beginning, but we need to be flexible in a way. So that's sort of a balance that if we were to do it again, I would be a little bit more sensitive to that, I think. The basic criticism that we've gotten here is this really open science? Because people aren't sharing raw data, they're sharing more interpretations, they're sharing their analysis with and supported by raw data. Another criticism is this might be too open. We're asking for too much. We're asking for the raw data anyway, and therefore what could happen with that raw data. So in a very basic way, having a good sort of trust relationship is important with researchers who do contribute. So next steps, there's another study being developed by Julia Christis. So this is basically more cases, but done through more of qualitative comparative analysis. Excited to see where that one leads. We also have questions about in which domains, which topics can this be more relevant to? Also, methods of data collection. Are there ethnographic studies that may not fit in if we're trying to compare studies that have primarily relied on interview data? Yeah, I'll leave it there, but thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to the questions.